Welcome to the Holistic Growth Podcast, navigating business and natural health and functional medicine, where we bring you insights and strategies to help grow your practice and amplify your impact. Well, welcome everybody to the Holistic Business Podcast, hosted and sponsored by Get Healthy Stores. My name is Dr. Tracy Straub. I am the Chief Health and Growth Officer right here at Get Healthy Store. And today, my very good friend and special guest is back again, Ryan Obermeier from Evexia Diagnostics, one of my absolute favorite places to utilize for any type of specialty testing and blood work. Love it. We have a pretty cool topic today. We're going to be talking about cash-based labs and why this is increasingly becoming the preferred model for healthcare professionals. And actually, Ryan has some key points to share with us today. So thanks for being here, Ryan. I'm so glad you're back. Our last show was super popular.
Well, thank you for having me today. It is a very exciting topic. I will say that I was really introduced to the complexity of cash-based labs just a few months ago and the struggles sometimes that I believe healthcare professionals who even run a cash-based practice on how to apply cash-based labs rather than leveraging an insurance plan as an example. And very excited to have this conversation. Honestly, this is the first time it's ever been recorded, so I'm excited for that. And I got a few notes written down here, so excited to have the conversation.
Yeah. And honestly, I have to be perfectly honest. I do get the question about insurance. But I usually put out right at the beginning that if I write the script for them, it will be cash pay, but it will get me the results. The labs will be far cheaper than probably what they're going to see somewhere else. And it streamlines our process. If somebody does want to use their healthcare professional or try to use insurance, I'm okay with that, but it usually slows everything way down. So the way you guys do it at Evexia, hands down, has been the easiest process that I have used in my practice. And you know me, I write a lot of blood work. So I'm going to let you go into your points because I'm very interested in this.
Right. So a little bit about my background and just to tell you a little bit about why this has become of interest to me. I'll tell you a little bit about where I've come in the industry, and then I'm going to circle back to another relationship that I had that had really spotlighted what I foresee as one of the biggest challenges for providers in the integrative functional medicine space to really just use cash-based labs or leverage cash-based labs solely and not really involve patients' insurance. So quick little ditty on myself. I'm 14 days-ish or maybe 15 days-ish shy of entering into my 27th year in the integrative functional medicine space. Started my career in dietary supplement sales with that particular manufacturer vendor. I was employee number 4. So I had the great opportunity of doing many roles: sales management, biz dev, international biz dev, from coast to coast, north of the border, south of the border in Canada and Mexico. My greatest takeaway from my time with that organization was really understanding that the integrative functional medicine space is highly fragmented. What I mean by that is if I were to walk into a practice in Southern Florida, that practice, the way it appears, the aesthetics, the experience is sometimes significantly different than if I were to enter into a practice that is in central Wisconsin, where I was born and raised. So what I was able to take away from my time at that organization was really taking best practices of all these major regions in the country. And then again, I spent over a year of my life in Canada, 1 week at a time. So there's some best practices there as well. After that, I was the vice president of mergers and acquisition at Forum Health. And I was able to buy nearly 40 medical practices in an extremely short period of time of about 4 years. And my greatest takeaway at that role of being a vice president of M&A was really understanding what physicians wanted and needed. It was very eye-opening. Once I started working alongside them versus trying to sell to them, I had a really clear picture presented to me on what is needed and wanted. And currently today, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Evexia Diagnostics. And our purpose as a business is to make the lives of providers and their teams a lot easier. So let me jump into your question. Is this idea of cash-based labs. So again, I started my career 27 years ago for a great company. And you can imagine how many conversations 27 years ago I had about conflict of interest, right? The industry, it wasn't the beginning of the industry, but it certainly was when the industry started taking traction. You saw these regional organizations go national with their reach, right? And I had tons of conversations where doctors had brought up conflict of interest, and they would say, so you want me, the healthcare professional, to prescribe nutraceutical intervention, which nutraceuticals wasn't even a word then, to my patients, all the while knowing my patients know I'm making money off of off of the supplements. And fast forward 20 over 25 years later, I doubt that conversation ever happens with nutraceutical reps. It was, back then that generation was pushing the boulder up the hill and navigating those waters. Well, unfortunately, laboratory testing has not joined the journey of what I experience in nutraceuticals. So there's still this idea of I don't want to nickel and dime my patients. I don't want my patients to feel like I'm making money off their labs when we know that insurance will cover their labs, so on and so forth. So I had this idea and this challenge that existed, but it was spotlighted on a recent conversation with one of our partners. And I was talking to a very young sales team, reminded me of myself many, many years ago. And they had two basically pushbacks. One, it was very easy to help them navigate the first pushback from talking about cash-based labs. But the second one the second one is they're like, you know what? Our providers still don't understand cash-based labs, and they still believe that their patients want to run their labs through their insurance plans. So I quickly started jotting down some notes, and I was able to help have a conversation. But over the last couple months since that conversation, I have 7 ideas that if I was a healthcare professional in the integrative functional medicine space, I might consider why cash-based labs might be better than leveraging my patients' insurance plans.
Yeah. Well, I loved how you pointed out that doctors don't want to look like they're nickel and diming people with labs or testing, but it's really essential for us to make data-driven decisions. And patients should demand that from their practitioner. It is a scary time in functional and integrative health when people go to a healthcare professional and don't get any testing or any labs. I understand that you can learn a lot from symptomology, but I do think there are labs that are needed. So I appreciate that you pointed it out because I have found myself saying that as well. And then it dawned on me like, wait a second, I'm not nickel and diming. I'm giving them quality care. I have to have labs on them. I need to see your blood analytes. I need to see your testing. So I appreciate you taking that time and pointing that out.
Yeah, a couple things that I would say is if you don't have the testing, it is throwing darts in the dark because you can't always get it from just conversations with patients. The first time I was brought to this concept was, and this is going many, many years back, HP axis dysfunction and doing salivary cortisol became very, very popular. Everyone started doing it, and then doctors started thinking, oh, I can just have conversations and I can kind of gauge on where they're going to be with regards to their cortisol and curve and things like that. The second idea that I have, and this is going back to my time as a VP of mergers and acquisition. So again, I was employee number one at that company. And when you're employee one at that company, you're doing everything. So not only did I buy the practice, the physician from whom I bought the practice, they stayed on as an employee. I had to work right alongside him or her to build the business. And what we discovered, in order to keep a business afloat, meaning it's viable, it can stay. If a computer breaks down, we can go buy a new computer. Each provider in every practice needed to generate $600 of revenue, top line revenue, every hour that the practice was open. When you consider time and motion, the amount of effort it takes, all the time, energy, and effort dedicated to running labs in your practice, you wouldn't have the concern of marking up labs in the states in which you can or navigating the nomenclature that allows you to do that. One popular way that we saw, and we started incorporating it, was bundling, right? So if you're a provider and you're like, I don't really want to feel like I'm nickel and diming my patients, always consider bundling. You can still do the markup on the labs, incorporate the nutraceutical intervention, IV intervention, whatever, and the visits all into a bundle. It's the best of both worlds. You get to mark up the labs, which you absolutely should, in the states that you can. And then secondly, would be able to not feel like you're nickel and diming patients. So I agree with you. So I basically, having this conversation 2 months ago, I just started drafting some ideas on, all right, why would I, as a healthcare professional in the integrative functional medicine space, not really allow, if that's a good word, leveraging the insurance plan of my patients. So here are the 7 ideas that I came up with, and we can um, shoot back and forth some ideas. The first one is high deductibles. So one of the things that I notice is that for healthcare professionals, when they are primarily in a cash-based practice, they kind of lose the nomenclature. They don't know exactly what's what, and they don't understand what exists in the marketplace today. So it's important to know what's a deductible, what's a premium, what does this all mean? But another idea is just this concept of what is a high deductible plan? Well, a high deductible plan is really the vast majority of what patients are going to spend on an annual basis outside their premium is a certain dollar amount that I need to reach in order for my insurance to actually kick in. Historically, or at least for the last several years that I've been paying attention to my own personal high deductible plan, the deductible is going to hover between $6,000 and $8,000 every calendar year or whenever that plan starts up again. A lot of times I think it might be May when health insurance plans kick in again. However, in recent conversations, I've heard that deductible is now $12,000. So what that means, as a patient, for the most part, the first $6,000 to $8,000, or in some cases $12,000, that I as a patient am going to spend above and beyond my monthly premium falls on my shoulders. Now, that's not to say that in some areas of the country, again, best practices that I have in my 27 years, some areas of the country do have a deductible associated with their labs. And historically, that's going to be $500 to $1,000 per calendar year or whatever year it might look like. So here's my case in point with the high deductible plans. For the average patient who is pursuing integrative functional medicine providers or a practice, the likelihood of them hitting that deductible is really not likely, right? Unless you have cancer or if you're having a major medical procedure, the likelihood of you hitting $6,000 or $8,000 for most integrative functional medicine practices throughout the country and north of the border, south of the border, probably not going to happen. So what that means is it's all out of pocket anyway. So they're spending, it's all cash anyway. So that's number one, high deductible plans and really understanding those.
Yeah. And some people will say to me that they want to try to get their deductible hit, so they want to run it through. And I'm like, well, you can try to do that, but maybe, that's not necessary because they're probably not going to use the rest of that plan anyway for the rest of the year if they're doing preventative things. So it's just having those conversations. I personally, I'm not going to force anybody to do anything, but it seems not logical to me to try to get an $8,000 deductible down with 3 or 4 tests that I may need. Just doesn't seem like something that would work and have a successful flow, when it comes to patient care.
Regions of the country where their insurance plans, it's common to see a separate deductible for labs. To get to $500 or $1,000 in labs isn't that frequent. It doesn't happen all that often unless you're dealing with complex chronic illness. Then certainly I understand that you might be running some labs. The one thing, and I'm just going to jump to my point 4 just because of your comments, is patients can also self-file. So one of the advantages, we're going a little bit out of order here, but they can still self-file, meaning they can still put that amount of money that they spent on cash-based labs towards their deductible. Here is one thing to be aware of as a healthcare professional, especially healthcare professionals who are contracted with insurance plans. This is not something that you want patients to do. You might want to look at your agreements with the insurance companies. It might be against that agreement because they sometimes look at that as pass-through billing, which is a major, major no-no. So just be cognizant of that. If you do give them a super bill where they can self-file and there's labs on that, and you are contracted with said insurance company, that if I would probably just steer clear of saying, hey, you can go ahead and self-file. But if you are a typical integrative functional medicine provider and you're not contracted with any insurance companies, go ahead. Provide them with the super bill, give them the coding, they can go self-file, and it will still go against their deductible. So really good option.
This episode is brought to you by Myos MD. What if there was a natural way to reduce the muscle loss we all experience with age? Let me introduce you to Myos MD. Myos MD is a powerfully unique supplement designed to reduce muscle loss, whether it's through aging, injury, illness, or weight loss. The secret? Fortitropin, an all-natural bioactive compound developed by top scientists and researched at some of the world's finest institutions. Here's how it works. Fortitropin has been clinically shown to lower myostatin, increase muscle protein synthesis, and reduce anabolic resistance. In fact, in a double-blind, placebo-controlled study at the University of California, Berkeley, men and women aged 60 to 75 saw an impressive 18% increase in muscle protein synthesis with Fortitropin compared to a placebo. And subjects saw these results with no additional exercise. This isn't just a supplement, it's science in action, helping your patients build muscle, recover faster, and live powerfully. To learn more about the research and benefits of Myos MD, visit myosmd.com today.
So let's jump to bullet point number 2, which in this conversation is bullet point number 3 is pricing. So historically, insurance let me say this, lab pricing can be looked at as 4 areas, right? Insured pricing, uninsured pricing, cash-based pricing, and then I'm going to throw a 4th one in there, and I'm going to call it Evexia pricing, right? So Evexia pricing, our hope is that we undercut all those prices that you might see from an insurance plan. So insured makes sense. I'm insured, I'm going to cover that. If you were to look at what they're charging, if you remember, I remember back in the day hearing that, hey, this particular patient was in the hospital and they were charging them $13 a pill for acetaminophen. That's the type of pricing. To give you a clear context, insurance pricing for, let's say, a CBC is $80 to $90. Well, you can get it through Evexia, that same test or panel of tests, for $5. So what these lab companies will do is they're going to go into your practice and they say, hey, if you send your patient out to a local draw center of a major reference lab, we're going to cut that patient a deal. We're going to give them a 90% discount. Wow, 90% discount. That sounds pretty good to me. 90% discount to your patient. So you as a provider are like, man, I got an awesome lab company. They're going to help me help my patients get them an awesome deal. But they're not telling you that they're charging you $13 for an acetaminophen pill. Their pricing is so ridiculous that if you give them 90% discount, it's still a ridiculous price. So again, the second bullet point is you are not going to get better pricing directly through a major reference lab or through their insurance than you would get through Evexia Diagnostics. Now we're going to hold the pricing conversation for point number 5, because we're going to come back to this and why this is going to be even more important for some situations in the future. The third, or in this case, 4th reason why someone might consider foregoing leveraging insurance for lab-based, cash-based labs, is they can still use their HSA and FSA, just like they would use with dietary supplements, Band-Aids, alcohol swabs, whatever. They can still utilize that. So that's a 3rd reason why they might want to consider using cash-based labs versus leveraging insurance. I already mentioned bullet point number 4 on the self-file. Again, if I was contracted with some insurance companies, I would probably just say we're not even going to offer that. We don't want patients self-filing because it does put that agreement in risk. In fact, one of the physicians, and she was my absolute favorite, she was in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. She did not know that that was a problem with her insurance agreement with her insurance company. And she had to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars back to the insurance company because it was against the agreement. And obviously, she had no nefarious intent. She just didn't read word for word what the agreement was, which I don't think anyone does when they click on their Apple Store update to their agreement plans, right?
You read that. I don't need to read them.
So let's go back to cash-based labs and how things are priced. So as I mentioned, Evexia Diagnostics, our hope is to have the very lowest pricing. Well, that gets us into now, why does that become even more important than just the price alone? Well, there's something called back billing or balance billing. So as a healthcare professional in the integrated functional medicine space, your knowledge is going to become pretty nuanced. And you might order some lab analytes that might not be covered by insurance. Or in some cases, some of these analytes are covered by insurance, not covered by insurance, covered by insurance, not covered by insurance. If you've been in the space for a while, think of homocysteine. Homocysteine wasn't covered, then covered, wasn't covered, now covered, so on and so forth. I've heard the same thing, and I haven't verified this with HSCRP. Covered, not covered, not covered, not covered. In the cases when you write for those lab analytes and it's not covered, what will happen is your patients are going to get balance billed or back billed the full amount. So what that means is they're going to get charged $13 for an acetaminophen pill for the lab. And one of the practices that I bought in downtown Chicago, to give you a clear illustration, this is a true phenomenon. Again, downtown Chicago, very affluent area of the world. The patient, very affluent gentleman, he was presented with the idea of cash-based labs, and he insisted on leveraging his insurance. And even though we as that Forum Health, the company I was a VP of M&A for, said, listen, you don't want to do this. We are certain there are some analytes in this panel that will not be covered by insurance. And he said, no, I got great insurance. It's going to cover it. Well, that $200 cash panel, he got balance billed or back billed the full $13 a pill for Tylenol, $2,000. So why that is important is if you were to use cash-based labs, you're not going to get balance billed because you're paying the very lowest, and you're not going to get dinged for that $13 for an acetaminophen pill. The sixth reason I might consider leveraging cash-based labs is not everyone is looking for a diagnosis. Sometimes patients are going to integrative functional medicine practice, oftentimes on the longevity, anti-aging side of the continuum of practices. Sometimes they're just looking for optimization, and most of these tests are not going to be covered because they have nothing to do with a diagnosis that would be associated with the patient because the patient doesn't have a diagnosis.
That is true. So I want to touch on that when you're done.
I was just going to say the classic example is Syndrome X. Syndrome X, that diagnosis only exists so you can bill insurance. It's a collection of 5 symptoms associated with diabetes. Well, you can't really bill for that unless there's a diagnosis. So they created Syndrome X, which we know now today as metabolic syndrome, which is part of that whole cornucopia of cardiometabolic risk.
Well, that is one of the biggest things that when people want to take whatever blood analytes I want, so if I want a metabolic panel or I want to see hormones, I try to explain to them that if you're not in front of the right doctor, it's going to get denied. So they go to their PCP and they're asking for a full female hormone panel. Well, that doctor's like, that's not my scope. I got to refer you out. So they won't run the test. The second thing that happens is they'll say, well, these tests won't be covered by insurance. What is she trying to diagnose you with? And they're like, nothing. I just want to get some blood work done and see where these numbers are. So they normally won't write it because they know it'll be denied. So again, I just want to emphasize when we're working with client care, as with anything service-based, Customer experience is number one. And how does it feel to the patient or the client when they come to see me? They don't have blood work. I give them a recommendation of what I need. Then they want to try to go through their insurance. So they have to make an appointment. They have to pay the copay. They go in only to be denied. Then they come back to me, which I may not have space to get them in for a while. So it just ends up in this poor customer experience. So what you have done over at Evexia Diagnostics and what we did with Get Healthy together is we've made that flow seamless. And I just want to emphasize that having the conversation with your patients about the fact that it's going to be cash pay. And I mean, Ryan, I don't know how much other practitioners bill out, but I mean, I can get a lot of information from a $75 basic blood work panel, a lot of information. And then if I need more specialized testing, I will inform my client and say, we're going to need a GI map or we're going to need a Dutch, and that costs this much. I don't upsell it. That is the cost of the test, but I want you to save for it now because we're going to need that in the future. They're okay with that. If they know what they have to pay and they know it's going to be a better experience and they're going to get answers faster, they are perfectly fine with paying out of pocket. And they would rather, because you know what people say to me? I don't want to go into the doctor. Can you write it for me? I hear that all the time. So just wanted to
Absolutely. So again, we're talking about not everyone needs a diagnosis, and they're looking for optimization. I think that's going to parlay nicely into as well. Since COVID, and I think everyone watching this would agree, privacy for some patients has become paramount. And the last thing they want to be doing is running labs through their insurance where now they're tracking whatever, let's say you have pre-diabetes. So that would be something else that I would say is kind of in our back pocket on why they might not want to leverage their insurance plan. My number 8 of 8, I know I said 7, but the privacy thing, as you were talking, Dr. Straup, I was like, oh, I forgot that one bullet point. So again, my first time I've ever been really talking about this conversation, all 8 bullet points at once. So the last part is just really creating murky water. And what I mean by that is once you open, what's the phrase? Once the horse is out of the barn, it's not going back in. And once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's not going back again. Once you open up the conversation of insurance to patients and say, hey, you know what? Our practice does everything cash except the labs. I will guarantee you that you will be asked by these patients, well, you covered insurance for this. Could we get insurance coverage for this as well? And that conversation might not happen with you, the healthcare professional. 100% zero exception. Your front of the house is going to have those conversations, and it's going to create murky waters because it's not going to be clear, concise to the front of the house. You just got to trust me on that. So again, thanks for the patience. I'm going through these 8 things, which I'm going to briefly go through them really again, my first time going through this presentation. So number 1, high deductibles, likelihood of getting there, not probably all that likely for if they're pursuing integrative functional medicine, $6,000 to $8,000, potentially $12,000 in most areas of the country. Not going to happen unless you have major healthcare issue or if you're having a procedure. Number 2, best pricing. Hands down, you're not going to get charged $13 for an acetaminophen pill. 3, they can still apply the HSA or FSA accounts to this, just like they would with dietary supplements, Band-Aids, what have you. Next is self-filing. They can certainly self-file, but just be, I personally, if I was a healthcare professional, if I was contracted with any insurance, I'd probably take a pass on offering that. Next would be privacy. Since COVID, privacy has just really become paramount with some patients. Back billing, again, going back into the pricing. If you are ordering a test that's not covered by insurance, that full price, the $13 pill of acetaminophen is going to be delivered. The bill is going to be delivered to your patient, and that's going to fall on their shoulders. They will be responsible for that. Number 7, not everyone's looking for a diagnosis. Sometimes they just don't feel like they felt 2 years ago, and they're looking for optimization. And then last but not least, make life easier for you, make life easier for your front of the house team. Don't murky the waters. Just say, hey, we're a cash-based practice. This is the way that we do things. And I assure you, I have your best interests at heart, and we're going to do everything that we possibly can and make it the most affordable, I would say, or best benefit for you, considering the amount of money that you'd be spending at the practice. So those are my 8 ideas. Again, my first time I've ever delivered this message, but I think that there's 8 good ideas I would certainly consider in offering cash-based practices as opposed to leveraging my patient's insurance plans.
Yeah, and 8 good ways to explain it to the patient as well, because I think sometimes doctors just don't know what to say, or the front desk doesn't know what to say. So this podcast, make sure you pass it to your entire staff for them to listen to if you're considering going all cash-based, especially with labs. Make sure that you click the link in the show notes to get signed up with Evexia Diagnostics if you do not already have an account. And remember, if you have a Get Healthy store, you can connect and integrate your Evexia account with your Get Healthy store so that you can script blood work in one link with the solutions for your patients and clients. So, Ryan, you're always just so top notch and to the point. I love all the info you bring, and Evexia is very lucky to have you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I'll just make one quick comment before I let you go. We covered a lot in a very short period of time. Evexia Diagnostics has created 5 assets to support this conversation. 2 of those are from Evexia or Get Healthy Store to you, the healthcare professional, to kind of review these 8 points. And then we have some tools for you to utilize with your patients to say, hey, I, as your healthcare professional, this is why I'm recommending cash-based labs. Those will be available, I would say, in the next 1 or 2 business weeks. So we're looking at the worst case scenario at the very beginning of June. Those will be available to you. So if you see these and you are an Evexia Diagnostics client, just reach out to Evexia Diagnostics and we can help you get those resources.
Absolutely. And you have an event coming up as well in May. Is that correct? It's a large summit. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So Evexia Diagnostics is the platinum sponsor of an upcoming event that we partner with an organization, a marketing firm called Heal at Scale. Heal at Scale has really dialed in what I would say is a prospective patient acquisition funnel. Again, when I went back, if you go back to when I was at Forum Health, we had 2 major pain points. Number 1 was staffing, as I imagine every practice in the United States, that's their number 1 problem or pain point. Number 2 is patient acquisition. Heal at Scale and their founders, Joy and Travis Houston, have really figured out a way to take labs from the back of the experience with patients all the way to the front. And their program is called Lead with Labs. So if you are a practitioner who offers cash-based labs and you want to leverage cash-based labs in your patient acquisition funnel, this would be a phenomenal experience. And I believe it's the 21st through the 23rd. So it's going to be a summit, 3 days of presentations for you to kind of take notes on.
Yeah, and it's specifically for practitioners to learn. So, and a lot of great speakers are on this list. I mean, a lot of my favorites, I know that. So make sure that you do tune in because the summit goes on for 3 days. And if you register, I would assume that, they will give you the playback recordings, but you have to register in order to get those. So please do that. I love that you're partnering with systems that will help practitioners scale because revenue is important. Although we want to take care of people, we also have to stay in business. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for everything you do. Guys, thanks for joining the podcast today. Make sure you give us a subscribe, like, and share it, and we'll see you next time.